Earlier, Mason had agreed to step into the most outrageous agreement of his life. An agreement that even he, during those long nights lying on a hospital cot, waiting for updates on Ellie, could not believe he had nodded to. He agreed to give billionaire Caroline Aldridge a child. In return, she would cover the entire cost of the surgery that would save Ellie. The little girl who was his whole world. Ellie had undergone her operation successfully. Caroline was now pregnant. And between two people from two completely different worlds, something had begun to grow. Not love, not yet, but concern, understanding, warmth, the kind both had forgotten long ago. Mason thought the hardest part was over. He was wrong, because in the shadows, someone else had seen everything. Henderson, the vice chairman of the board. A man willing to burn Caroline to the ground just to seize power, now held photos that could destroy both her reputation and her life overnight. And just when things seemed to be settling, Dana, Mason's ex-wife, the woman who abandoned Ellie when the girl needed her most, suddenly returned, demanding to see her child. But danger and trouble were not coming solely from the outside. Fate had never been merciful to anyone, and it always demanded a price. When Caroline made a new proposal, even more insane than the first agreement, a marriage, Mason was forced to confront the question he had spent his entire life avoiding. Could he truly love this woman? And if he could, would that love be strong enough to protect them from everything waiting ahead? If you're following this story, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next part, because what's coming will be far more intense. You want to know how Mason will answer Caroline, don't you? Stay with me. The story is far from over. Everything began on a Friday afternoon. Mason had just returned from the hospital after visiting Ellie when he saw Margaret, the housekeeper, waiting by the front door of the mansion, looking uneasy. "Mr. Calloway, Mrs. Aldridge wants to see you immediately." In her office. What happened? Margaret only shook her head softly, avoiding his eyes, offering no explanation. Mason stepped into Caroline's office. She was standing by the window with her back to him, but he could clearly see her tense shoulders, her hands clenched tight, as if holding herself together. Caroline? It was the first time he'd called her by her first name, not Mrs. Aldridge. He didn't know when it happened, but the distance between them had shrunk enough that formal titles suddenly felt foreign. Caroline turned around. Her face was pale. "Henderson knows." Those 4 words hit Mason like ice water thrown straight into his chest. "Knows? What do you mean?" Caroline handed him a brown envelope. Inside were photographs. A photo of Mason walking out of the mansion. A photo of Mason and Caroline standing by the window. A photo of Mason holding her hand in the garden. And one taken from afar, but clear enough to show Caroline resting her head on Mason's shoulder. "He hired a private investigator to follow me," Caroline said, her voice trembling slightly. "For the past 2 weeks. I had no idea." Mason stared at the photos, feeling as if the ground beneath him had cracked open. "What does he plan to do with these?" "He called me this morning." Caroline lowered herself onto the chair, her hands circling her stomach, as if protecting the child inside. "He said that if I don't resign as CEO and hand over control to him, he will send these photos to the media, to shareholders, to everyone." "Resign?" Mason almost couldn't believe his ears. "You built this company for 15 years. "I know," Caroline cut him off, bitterness thick in her voice. "But he doesn't care. He's waited for this moment for years, and now he has exactly what he needs." Mason stepped closer and knelt in front of her. "We'll find a way. There has to be a way. What way? Caroline lifted her eyes to him, her blue irises full of despair. Those photos are real. What's between us is real. If the press finds out, they will tear me apart. Female CEO pays janitor to get her pregnant. Can you imagine that headline? She stood up abruptly, pacing the room like a trapped animal. And it's not just about reputation. She clenched her fists. The stock will plunge. Partners will pull out. Everything my father built, everything I've spent my entire life protecting, could collapse in a single night. Mason rose to his feet. His head spun. One thought echoed relentlessly. It was all his fault. If he hadn't come into her life, if he hadn't agreed to that insane deal from the beginning, Caroline wouldn't be cornered like this. "I'll leave," he said, his voice tight. "I'll disappear. You can tell Henderson I'm just a gardener or a distant acquaintance. I'll never show my face in public." "And the baby?" Caroline looked straight at him. "Do you think Henderson will ignore the fact that I'm having a child with no father?" Mason fell silent. She was right. Even if he vanished, the problem remained, like a ticking bomb. "So, what do you plan to do?" Caroline stood still for a long time. The silence became so sharp that Mason could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Then she looked up, her voice frighteningly calm. "There is one way." "What way?" She met his eyes without hesitation. "We get married." Mason was certain he had misheard. "Get married?" "Yes." Caroline nodded, her expression slowly returning to the sharp, icy resolve she had worn in the early days. "If we get married, the story changes entirely. It won't be a scandal anymore. It's simply a CEO marrying the man she loves, carrying his child. Normal, legal, nothing for anyone to twist. But that would be a lie. This world is full of lies, Mason." Caroline exhaled softly, exhaustion in her voice. "Do you think marriages in high society are about love? Happiness? No. Most are arrangements, contracts. At least between us, there is still respect." Mason shook his head. He felt as if he'd wandered into some strange dream. "I can't. This isn't how things should happen." "Then how should it happen?" Caroline stepped closer, her eyes glistening but tense. "Do you have a better idea? Can you save my company? Can you make Henderson disappear?" Mason couldn't answer. "I'm not forcing you," Caroline continued, her voice softening. "You have fulfilled your end of the deal. Your daughter had her surgery. You can walk away right now, and I won't take anything back." She turned her back, as if ending the conversation. "But if you stay, if you agree to help me survive this, I will make sure you and Ellie have the best life possible. Always." Mason stood frozen, his mind tangled. One path was freedom. He could take Ellie far away, to a place where no one knew their names, live a simple life. No scandals, no Henderson, no iron gates. Forget this mansion. Forget Caroline. Forget everything. The other path was, what? A paper marriage? A performance that might last the rest of his life? But then he thought of Caroline, the woman curled up crying alone in her late mother's room. The woman is reading children's books at midnight. The woman who had pulled him and Ellie out of the abyss without asking for anything except a child. And he thought of the baby she carried. His baby. "Caroline." She turned. Mason stepped closer, his heartbeat loud but his eyes steadier than ever. "If I agree, this won't be a fake marriage." Caroline frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I've been by your side for the past 2 months," Mason said slowly, choosing each word carefully. "I've seen you cry. I've seen you laugh. I've seen you strong enough to terrify anyone. And I've seen you fragile enough to fear letting anyone close. And He hesitated, battling himself. I don't know if this is love. I'm afraid to call it that. But I know I care about you. Truly care. Not because of money, not because of the deal. Caroline froze, her lips parting slightly, unable to speak. If we get married, Mason continued, I want it to be real. At least, to try to be real. Not a performance for the cameras, only to return to being strangers once the doors close. He reached out and took her hand. Are you willing to try? Caroline looked down at his hand holding hers, the calloused hand of a laborer, the hand that carried Ellie through clinics, the hand that cooked her eggs in the middle of the night, the hand that always reached for her whenever she looked like she might break. She looked up again, her blue eyes shimmering. For the first time in her life, a man had spoken to her like this without wanting anything in return. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know how to love someone anymore, Mason. I forgot how. Then we'll learn, he said, his voice warm and steady. From the beginning. Caroline glanced at their joined hands one more time, as if weighing her entire life in that single moment. Then she nodded. All right. Her voice trembled, but the hopelessness in her eyes had faded. We'll try. News of Caroline Aldridge's wedding spread like wildfire. Within just 24 hours of the official announcement, every newspaper in Texas, big and small, ran the story. The most powerful female billionaire in Austin was marrying an unknown man. No one knew who Mason Calloway was. No one understood why Caroline would choose someone so ordinary. And that was exactly what Caroline wanted. She held a short press conference, appearing in public with Mason standing beside her. Caroline wore a cream-colored dress, her belly slightly rounded, and for the first time in many years, she gave a genuine smile in front of the cameras. I know people have a lot of questions, she said, her voice calm. But love doesn't need an explanation. Mason is the man I chose, and I have never been happier. The reporters immediately erupted. Questions firing off like machine gun bursts. Mrs. Aldridge, what did Mr. Calloway do for a living before this? How did the two of you meet? Is this a shotgun wedding? Caroline didn't answer them one by one. She simply took Mason's hand, smiled, and said, We'll be having a small, private ceremony in 2 weeks. Thank you all for your concern. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the press stunned that they had gotten nothing out of her. Henderson, on the other hand, couldn't bear it. He had prepared the perfect scandal, and Caroline turned it into a romantic love story. He had no more cards to play. At least, that's what Mason thought. A week before the wedding, Mason brought Ellie to the mansion. She had fully recovered from the surgery. Her cheeks were rosy, her blue eyes sparkling, her laughter bright and clear like wind chimes. When the car stopped in front of the gate, Ellie's mouth fell open. Daddy, is this a castle? Mason chuckled, though anxiety twisted inside him. This was Ellie's first time meeting Caroline. He had no idea how things would go. He didn't know how his daughter would react to the news that her father was about to marry a woman she'd never met. Caroline was waiting at the door. She wore a simple floral dress, her hair down softly, looking gentler than Mason had ever seen her. When Ellie stepped out of the car, the two of them looked at each other. 1 second of silence. Then Ellie tilted her head, studying Caroline with innocent curiosity. Who are you? Caroline bent down to her eye level. I'm your dad's friend, she said, her voice softer than a breeze. My name is Caroline. Caroline, Ellie repeated. Your name is like a princess in a cartoon." Caroline let out a small laugh. A real laugh. "Is that so? No one has ever called me a princess before?" "But you live in a castle." Ellie pointed at the mansion. "Anyone who lives in a castle is a princess." Caroline turned to look at Mason, her eyes shimmering. "She's really smart." Mason could only smile. Watching Caroline and Ellie together, he felt a gentle warmth spread through his chest. That afternoon, Mrs. Lorraine arrived as well. Mason was more nervous about this meeting than anything else. His mother was traditional. How would she react to the news that her son was about to marry a billionaire? A woman he'd known for less than 3 months? But Mrs. Lorraine surprised him. When Caroline came out to greet her, Mrs. Lorraine didn't ask about money, status, or any of the things Mason had feared. She simply took Caroline's hands, looked straight into her eyes, and asked, "Do you care about my son?" Caroline froze. It was a question she had never prepared an answer for. She hesitated. "I'm learning how to care, and Mason is teaching me." Mrs. Lorraine was silent for a few seconds. Then she nodded. "That's enough," she said gently. "Love is not something that comes ready-made. It's something you build, day by day." She turned to Mason. "I don't understand everything that's going on. I'm old, I can't keep up with your lives. But I see that you're happy. I see Ellie is healthy. And I see this woman looking at you with the same eyes I once had for your father." She smiled, her old eyes warm and bright. Sometimes, life brings us things we never expected. Our job is to receive them. But not everyone could accept it. 3 days before the wedding, Mason got a call from an unknown number. "Mason Calloway?" The woman's voice froze him on the spot. "Dana." "I heard you're getting married," Dana said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "To a billionaire. You've really done well." Mason stepped out onto the balcony, away from Ellie, who was playing in the living room. "What do you want?" "I want to see Ellie." "No." "You can't stop me," Dana said, her voice sharp as a blade. "I'm her mother. I have rights." "You left," Mason replied, his tone so cold it surprised even himself. "You left when Ellie needed her mother most. You don't get to just come back because you feel like it." "I left because I had no choice," Dana burst out. "You think I wanted to? Ellie was sick. We had no money. Do you think I could handle that? I had to find a way to survive." Mason's fist tightened. "And your way was to go with a rich man and abandon your own child?" Silence on the other end. After a moment, Dana spoke quietly. "I know I was wrong. I know I hurt Ellie. But I'm still her mother, Mason. I have the right to see her." Mason wanted to hang up, block her number, erase the fact that Dana had ever existed. But he thought of Ellie, of the photo she kept hidden under her pillow, of the question, "Does Mommy Dana still think about me?" "Let me think about it," Mason said. "I'll call you back." He hung up and stared out at the vast, silent garden of the mansion. The past never truly disappears. It just waits for the right moment to return. That night, Mason told Caroline, Ellie was asleep. The entire mansion was wrapped in silence. "She wants to see Ellie," Mason said, his voice heavy. Caroline watched him for a long moment. "I don't know what to do," Mason sighed. "A part of me wants to say no, wants to protect Ellie from being hurt again. But another part, the other part thinks Ellie needs her mother," Caroline said softly. Mason nodded. Caroline stood and walked toward the window. "I have no right to tell you what to do," she said. "This is between you and Ellie. But I can tell you one thing." She turned back, her gaze softening. "I lost my mother when I was little. And all these years, I've only wished I could see her one more time. Just once. To ask the questions I never got to ask. To say the things I never got to say. Her voice trembled slightly. Ellie still has a mother. That woman did wrong. But she's still her mother. One day, when Ellie grows up, she'll want to know why. She'll want to decide for herself whether to forgive or not. Caroline moved closer and sat beside Mason. Don't take that chance away from her. Don't decide for her. Mason looked at Caroline, the woman he'd once thought was cold, emotionless, untouchable, yet who had a heart softer than anyone's. Thank you, he said quietly. Caroline gently took his hand. We're family now, Mason. Or at least, we're about to be. And family faces everything together. In that moment, Mason understood that he was no longer doing this out of duty, or because of a contract. He was doing it because he wanted to, because of the woman in front of him, because of the new family they were building together. The wedding took place on a late autumn afternoon, when the maple leaves had already turned a brilliant shade of orange and gold. Contrary to what people imagined a female billionaire would choose, Caroline opted for a simple ceremony. Just a few dozen close guests in the garden behind the mansion. No reporters, no cameras, no display of extravagance, only white roses, soft evening sunlight, and two people standing before each other. Caroline wore an ivory wedding dress, simple and unadorned, not a single diamond or crystal. Her belly was already clearly rounded at 4 months, yet Mason had never seen her look more beautiful. He stood there, in the very first suit he had ever worn in his life, watching the woman slowly walk toward him. 3 months ago, he had been a janitor, mopping floors at midnight in a skyscraper. Now, he was marrying the owner of that building. Life really did know how to tease a man. Ellie was the flower girl. She wore a pale pink dress, holding a basket of petals, walking ahead of Caroline with the serious expression of someone performing the most important mission of her life. Mrs. Lorraine sat in the front row, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. She had never dared to imagine she would one day see her son this happy. Dr. Harrison Cole was there too, standing quietly in a corner of the garden, a rare smile on his normally stern face. And Margaret, the housekeeper who had been with the Aldridge family for 30 years, kept dabbing her eyes with a white lace handkerchief, a gift Mrs. Eleanor, Caroline's mother, had given her long ago. When Caroline stood before Mason, they both fell silent for a moment. No words needed. No vows needed. Just looking into each other's eyes was enough. Then the minister began, "We are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls." When it came time for vows, Mason spoke first. He hadn't prepared a speech. No notes, no carefully crafted lines, only the things rising straight from his heart. Caroline. He said her name, his voice trembling slightly. 3 months ago, I didn't know who you were. I only knew you were someone I would never dare dream of. Someone from another world, another height. He took her hand. But then I realized, behind the walls you built was a woman, lonely, down to her bones. A woman who had forgotten what it felt like to be loved. A woman so strong that no one dared get close. His voice caught. I have nothing to give you. No money, no power, no status. But I have this heart. And from today on, it belongs to you. Completely. Without conditions. Caroline stood there, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in her life, someone had said such words to her. Not because of her money, not because of her power, but because of who she was. Then it was Caroline's turn. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. "Mason," she called softly. "I've lived 41 years without knowing what it feels like to truly be loved. I always thought love was a luxury, a privilege that belonged to others, something I didn't deserve." Her hand tightened around his. "Then you appeared, a man who mopped floors at midnight, a single father desperately trying to save his child, a man who didn't know how wealthy I was and didn't care." Her voice began to shake. "You showed me that kindness doesn't require money, that caring doesn't come with conditions, that a plate of scrambled eggs at midnight can be warmer than any lavish banquet." She looked straight into his eyes. "I don't know if I deserve you. I don't know if I can be a good wife or a good mother. But I promise I will try." Every day, one day at a time, she smiled through her tears. "For you, for Ellie, for the child we're about to have, for the family I've waited my whole life for." As they exchanged rings, Ellie stood right beside them, looking up with wide, round eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Miss Caroline is crying. Is she sad?" Mason knelt down beside his daughter. "No, sweetheart. She's not sad. She's happy." "But why do people cry when they're happy?" Mason smiled. "Because sometimes when someone is too happy, the heart can't hold it all, so it spills out as tears." Ellie thought for a moment, then nodded, as if she had just learned a great secret of adulthood. Caroline also knelt down beside Mason, looking at Ellie. "Ellie, do you give me permission to become part of your family?" Ellie tilted her head, her blue eyes studying Caroline intently. "You're going to stay with Daddy and me forever?" "I'll try." "You'll read me stories every night?" Caroline smiled. "If you want. You won't leave like Mommy Dana, right?" The question sliced through the air like a blade. The whole garden fell silent. Caroline squeezed Ellie's hand. "I promise you," she said, her voice solemn like a vow. "I will never leave. No matter what happens, I will always be here." Ellie stared at her for a long moment. Then she suddenly threw her arms around Caroline. "I agree," she said, her voice clear and bright. "You can be my mom." In that moment, Mason watched Caroline cry as she had never before. No longer tears of pain, no longer tears of loneliness, but the tears of someone who had finally found where she belonged after so many years lost. She hugged Ellie, then Mason. The three of them stood together, surrounded by roses. Mrs. Lorraine cried. Margaret cried. Even Dr. Cole had to turn away to secretly wipe his eyes. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the applause rose, not from hundreds of guests like other high society weddings, just a few dozen people. But every clap was sincere. Every smile was real. And Mason knew it was worth more than any lavish wedding in the world. That night, once all the guests had left, Mason and Caroline sat together on the balcony, looking out at the garden that had been filled with joy only hours earlier. Ellie was asleep in her room. Mrs. Lorraine was resting in her own guest room. The mansion was still as large as ever, still filled with countless rooms, but it no longer felt empty. "Do you regret it?" Caroline asked, her voice soft like the night breeze. Mason shook his head. "No. Do you?" Caroline stayed silent for a moment, then rested her head on his shoulder. "I've regretted many things in my life," she said quietly. "But this is not one of them." They sat there, saying nothing more, watching the stars shimmer across the Texas sky. Because sometimes silence, when shared, means more than 1,000 words. But life never lets anyone remain happy for too long without testing them. And the greatest test was already approaching quietly. Not from Henderson, not from Dana, but from a place neither Mason nor Caroline ever expected. From Caroline's own body. Everything began on a November night. Caroline was in her 6th month of pregnancy. Her belly was round and tight, and the baby inside kicked hard every night, as if eager to greet the outside world. Everything seemed perfect. Ellie had slowly grown accustomed to the new life. She called Caroline Mom Carol and clung to her every chance she got. Ms. Lorraine had moved into a small house near the mansion, close enough to visit her children and grandchildren every day, yet still have her own space. Henderson had gone silent after the wedding. He no longer had any reason to target Caroline. And Mason. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was truly living, not just surviving. But that night, everything changed. Mason was asleep when Caroline's cry of pain jolted him awake. He shot up, turning to the side. Caroline was curled up, both hands clutching her stomach, her face frighteningly pale. "Caroline, what's wrong?" "It hurts," she whimpered, her voice trembling. "It hurts so much, Mason." Mason switched on the light, and his heart nearly dropped. On the white sheet was a streak of red blood, spreading rapidly. "No! No!" Mason stammered, panic numbing his hands. "Hold on! I'm calling an ambulance right now!" He leapt out of bed, his hands shaking so hard he could barely dial. At the same time, he yelled for Margaret. 15 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. Mason sat beside Caroline on the stretcher, gripping her hand tightly. Caroline had slipped into semi-consciousness from the pain, her face ashen, her lips pale. "You're going to be okay," Mason whispered, unsure whether he was speaking to her or desperately trying to reassure himself. "You'll be okay. Our baby will too." But when he looked into the eyes of the medical staff, he knew things were far from okay. St. David's Hospital. Mason sat in the surgical waiting room, head down, hands clasped tightly. Dr. Cole had rushed to the hospital the moment he heard the news. He was in the operating room with the medical team, trying to save both Caroline and the baby. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. Mason couldn't remember how many cups of coffee he had drunk, nor how many times he'd paced the hallway. Every second felt like a lifetime. Ms. Lorraine arrived near dawn, carrying a sleepy Ellie. "Daddy, why is Mom Carol at the hospital?" Ellie asked, her voice anxious even though her eyes were still foggy with sleep. Mason embraced his daughter. "Mom Carol is sick, sweetheart. The doctors are taking care of her." "Is she going to be okay, Daddy?" Mason couldn't answer. He simply held Ellie tighter, as if clinging to the last bit of peace in the middle of the storm. Nearly 5 hours later, the operating room door finally opened. Dr. Cole stepped out with a weary face, his eyes sunken with worry. Mason shot to his feet. "Doctor, my wife!" Dr. Cole looked at him, his gaze heavy as stone. "Mr. Calloway, we need to speak in private." Mason's heart clenched. He handed Ellie to Ms. Lorraine and followed Dr. Cole into a small room. As soon as the door closed, Dr. Cole exhaled. "Mrs. Aldridge had placenta previa," he said, his voice dropping low. "The fetus experienced severe oxygen deprivation. We had no choice but to perform an emergency C-section." Mason felt his knees nearly give out. My baby." "It's a girl," Dr. Cole said. "Born at 26 weeks. She weighs only 800 grams. 800 grams. Lighter than a bottle of soda." "She's being moved to the neonatal intensive care unit," the doctor continued. "Her condition is very serious. Her lungs are not fully developed. We're doing everything we can, but—" He hesitated. "I can't promise anything." Mason felt the entire world collapsing around him. "Caroline? How is my wife?" Dr. Cole was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "She lost a great deal of blood. We've transfused and stabilized her for now, but—" "But what, doctor?" "To save her life, we had to remove her uterus." Mason stood there, frozen. Remove her uterus. That meant Caroline would never be able to get pregnant again. And the tiny baby lying in that incubator would be her only child, if she survived. Can I see her?" "Yes, but she's very weak. You can only stay a few minutes." Mason stepped into the recovery room. Caroline lay small and fragile among the tubes and machines. Her face was ghostly pale, her lips cracked and dry, but her eyes were open. When she saw Mason, she tried to smile. A faint, fragile smile that made his heart ache. "It's a girl," she whispered. Mason took her hand. "Our daughter is being cared for," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "She's tiny, but strong, just like her mother." Caroline closed her eyes, tears sliding down her temples. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I couldn't. Don't say that." Mason bent down and kissed her forehead. "You did everything. You fought, and you're still fighting. The doctor said, I can't have children anymore." Mason tightened his grip on her hand. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you're alive. You're here with me. With Ellie. With our daughter." Caroline looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. You're not disappointed?" Mason's heart twisted. How could she even think that? "Caroline," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't marry you because you could have children. I married you because you're you. Because I love you." It was the first time he said it. "I love you." Caroline's eyes widened, as if she couldn't believe the words. What did you just say?" Mason smiled, even as his own tears began to fall. "I love you, Caroline Aldridge. Not for your money, not for anything you have. I love you because you're the strongest, loneliest, and most incredible woman I've ever met." Caroline broke down crying as if years of grief were finally spilling out. And Mason simply sat beside her, holding her hand, letting her cry until the last tear fell. Outside in the hallway, Ellie waited with Ms. Lorraine. As soon as Mason stepped out, the little girl ran to him. "Daddy, is Mom Carol okay?" Mason knelt down, hugging his daughter. "Mom Carol is fine now, sweetheart. She just needs rest." "And the baby? I heard the doctor say she had the baby?" Mason hesitated. How could he explain to a 6-year-old that the newborn was fighting for her life? "The baby is very small, Ellie," he said slowly. "So small that she has to stay in a special incubator so the doctors can take care of her." "Like the doll in the glass box, Daddy?" Mason gave a sad smile. "Kind of. But this baby is real. She needs time to grow and get stronger." Ellie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said seriously, "I'll pray for the baby every night, just like Grandma taught me." Mason hugged her tighter. "Thank you, Princess. She will feel it for sure." And somewhere inside the neonatal intensive care unit, a tiny little being lay in her incubator, her body no bigger than an adult's hand, fighting for every second of life. Eleanor Rose Calloway, named after the grandmother she would never get to meet. But she would be loved, waited for, hoped for, by all the people standing outside, holding their breath for her. 3 months, 90 days, 2,160 hours. That was how long Eleanor Rose lay in the incubator, fighting for every breath. And it was also how long Mason spent learning the true meaning of the word hope. The first weeks were like hell. Eleanor was so tiny that Mason was afraid to even touch her. Her skin was thin as paper, reddish, with blue veins visible underneath. Her eyes were still closed. Her fingers were minuscule, fragile like matchsticks. Dr. Cole made no promises. He only repeated one sentence over and over. We wait, and we pray. Caroline was discharged after 2 weeks, but she practically moved into the hospital. Every day she sat beside Eleanor's incubator for hours, placing her hand against the glass, as if trying to pass her warmth through it. Mom is here, she whispered, even though she knew Eleanor couldn't hear her. Mom will always be here. Mason sat beside her, holding her hand. They didn't need to say much. Just being there together was enough to hold off the fear. Ellie visited every week. She stood outside the glass, pressing her face close, her round eyes full of wonder. The baby is so small, Daddy, she whispered. Smaller than my doll. But she'll grow, Mason replied. A little more every day. And she did. By week 4, Eleanor gained 50 grams. By week 6, she opened her eyes for the first time. Mason was sitting by the incubator when he saw her tiny eyelids tremble, then slowly lift. Blue eyes, as blue as Caroline's, looked at the world for the very first time. He burst into tears like a child. Caroline! Honey! She opened her eyes! Caroline practically ran over, bending close to the incubator. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled. A real smile, radiant like sunshine after a storm. My daughter, she whispered, tears spilling uncontrollably. You're so beautiful. By week 8, Eleanor could drink breast milk through a tube. By week 10, she was breathing on her own, without machines. By week 12, she weighed 2 kilograms. Every gram gained was a victory. Every day that passed was a miracle. And Mason realized that the greatest miracles in life didn't come from money or power. They came from a tiny human in an incubator who simply refused to give up. The day Eleanor was discharged was a late February day. It was still cold outside, but the sunlight was bright like midsummer. Caroline carried Eleanor in her arms, wrapped in the pink blanket Ellie had chosen. The baby was no longer red and wrinkly. Her skin was rosy, her cheeks round and plump, her blue eyes wide open, taking in everything around her. Ellie skipped beside them, so excited she could barely walk normally. The baby is coming home. The baby is coming home. Miss Lorraine stood waiting at the mansion door, tears brimming in her eyes. Let me hold her for a moment, she said, her voice trembling. Caroline gently placed Eleanor into her arms. Miss Lorraine looked at her tiny granddaughter, then lifted her eyes to the sky. Dear, do you see our grandchild? She whispered, as if speaking to her late husband. She's so beautiful, so beautiful. Mason stood there, watching his mother cradle the baby, watching his wife beside him, watching Ellie laugh in the sunlight. A year ago, he was just a desperate single father, mopping floors at midnight, not knowing how to save his child. Now, he had a family he had never dared dream of before. That night, after Eleanor and Ellie had fallen asleep, Mason and Caroline sat together on the balcony. Austin's night was quiet. The sky was so clear they could see the stars glittering overhead. Do you remember the first time we met? Caroline asked, her voice soft as the breeze. Mason chuckled. How could I forget? You called me into your office and made the craziest proposal I had ever heard. Caroline laughed too, the pure, light laugh she had slowly relearned over the past year. That day, I thought I was just signing another business deal, she said. I didn't realize I was buying a ticket straight to happiness. Buying? Mason raised an eyebrow playfully. So you bought me? Oh, stop it! Caroline punched him lightly on the shoulder. I paid a very high price for you. They both burst into laughter, their voices echoing into the calm night. Then Caroline suddenly fell quiet. She looked out into the distance, her eyes softening. You know, she said slowly, I used to think I didn't deserve to be loved. I thought I was too cold, too harsh, too broken. You're not broken, Mason said, taking her hand and squeezing gently. I know that now. Caroline smiled. You and Ellie, and then Eleanor, taught me that. She turned to him, her blue eyes shimmering under the warm yellow light. Thank you, Mason, for not giving up on me, for seeing who I really am, when even I couldn't see it. Mason didn't say anything. He simply leaned in and placed a kiss on her lips. A gentle kiss. A kiss of real love. 1 year later. The mansion was no longer silent. Ellie's laughter echoed down the hallways. Eleanor's baby babbling drifted from the nursery. Ms. Lorraine's steady voice recited bedtime stories every night. Margaret complained nonstop because the kids kept messing up the floor she had just cleaned 10 minutes earlier. Caroline had reduced her workload. She hired more managers so she could spend more time with her family. Henderson had been forced to resign after his illicit transactions came to light. The company still thrived, but for Caroline, it was no longer everything. As for Mason, he was no longer a janitor. But he didn't become some idle husband living off his wife's money either. He founded a charity fund supporting families with children suffering from congenital heart diseases, like Ellie once did. Families with no money, no hope, but with boundless love for their children. Someone helped me when I was at my lowest, Mason said at the launch event. Now it's my turn to give back. One Sunday afternoon, the whole family gathered in the yard. Eleanor took her first steps on the green grass, her tiny legs wobbling. Ellie stayed close behind, ready to catch her any time she stumbled. Come on, little Ellie. You can do it! Little Ellie was Ellie's nickname for her sister, because Eleanor's initials were also Ellie. 2 sisters, 2 Ellies, one big, one small. Caroline sat beside Mason, her head resting on his shoulder. Did you ever think life would turn out like this? She asked softly. Mason shook his head. No, I used to think life was just surviving day by day. Working, paying bills, worrying. I didn't know people could be this happy. And now you know. Mason looked at the 2 children laughing on the grass. His mother is sitting under the tree reading, occasionally looking up to smile. At the woman beside him, the woman he loved more than anyone in the world. Now I know, he said, smiling. Life wasn't perfect. There were still tiring days. There were still arguments. There were still sleepless nights because the baby cried. There were pressures from work, from society, from old wounds. Dana eventually got to see Ellie. They met once a month, under Mason's supervision. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect. But Ellie deserved a chance to decide her relationship with her birth mother. Henderson disappeared from their lives, but the business world still had plenty of people eager to go against Caroline. The corporate battlefield had never lacked enemies. And sometimes the ghost of loneliness would return, sitting silently at the edge of Caroline's bed during her restless nights. But unlike before, she no longer faced it alone. She had Mason, Ellie, Eleanor, Ms. Lorraine. She had a family, and that, perhaps, was the most precious thing money could never buy. Not skyscrapers, not luxury cars, not expensive dresses, but the laughter of children running through the house, the hand that reaches for yours when night falls, the look that needs no words to be understood. That was love. Real love. A love that sometimes begins in the most unexpected places. The story of Mason Calloway and Caroline Aldridge ends here, but their lives continue, with sunny days and rainy days, with smiles and tears, with all the things that make a life worth living. And if this story teaches us anything, perhaps it is this: sometimes the strangest beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. As long as we are brave enough to keep moving forward. If you've stayed with this story until now, thank you for spending your time here. If the journey of Mason, Caroline, and the two little Ellies touched you even a little, please give this video a like so YouTube knows you'd love to hear more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next tales of love, loss, forgiveness, and the endings that, maybe, you're also hoping for somewhere in your own life. And if you're still awake at this hour, tell me one thing. What do you believe truly saved Mason and Caroline? Money, fate, or love?